Democratic Representative Katie Porter whipped out her famous whiteboard and grilled an official with the United States Postal Service rather than the usual corporate executive. But she had a good reason for doing so. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, a Trump loyalist and a longtime Republican fundraiser and donor, changed Postal Service policies under his leadership, if you can call it that. And the results so far have been pretty disastrous. So disastrous, in fact, that it has led to an audit that was basically conducted to figure out why it's taking so damn long for Americans to get their mail. As Porter mentions via Twitter, on-time mail delivery has plummeted under Postmaster Louis DeJoy, forcing veterans to wait longer for prescriptions, seniors to scramble to pay bills without their Social Security checks, and communities to feel less connected. Postmaster DeJoy needs to go. And I certainly agree with her, especially when we experience the debacle with the post office right up to the lead up of the 2020 general election. DeJoy had tried to decommission a bunch of mail sorting machines at a time when we knew there would be this massive influx of mail-in ballots because of the pandemic. And federal judges needed to get involved and basically force him to put some of those machines back online. Now, Porter wanted to dig into the findings of the audit that I mentioned earlier. And so she started grilling Melina Perez. She's the USPS's Deputy Inspector General for auditing. Let's watch.
The audit found that by the spring of 2020, mail delivery was right around 92%. That is, about 92% of the mail got there within the standard of on time. That dropped to 80% by the fall of 2020, and by January of 2021 was hovering at around 61%. I realize this has gone up somewhat since then, but I wanted to ask you, when did Mr. DeJoy take over as postmaster? Do you know?
The summer of 2020.
The summer of 2020. So June of 2020. And what happened after he took over? Did the rate of on-time mail delivery go up or down?
Went down.
And I'm a professor, and I used to do a lot of grading. And 92% is considered widely like an A minus. 80 is considered hanging on to the lowest possible B. 60% is at best a D minus. The Postal Service delivers 48% of the world's mail. It is an institution, it is a civic treasure, and we let it get all the way. What you found is we let it get all the way to that D minus level.
I love it when she gets that whiteboard ready, because you know she's about to drop some really important facts. And look, as we've talked about on weekends before, the Postal Service is such a vital and critical government agency. We'll get into more details about that a little later. But I do want to get back to DeJoy and what he has done, because he has, in fact, had a negative impact on the Postal Service. And that negative impact has been pretty dramatic and swift. The USPS implemented new service standards, for instance, that slow some first-class mail deliveries as part of efforts to reduce red ink regulations, of course. Now, the new standards revised 1 to 3 day service standards to 1 to 5 days, impacting about 40% of first-class mail. He made other notable changes as well. USPS's slowdowns have been a recurring issue since the summer, when DeJoy implemented a slew of cost-cutting measures that suddenly and severely degraded delivery services. His policies prohibited delivery trucks from waiting for late mail or making extra trips. He dismantled sorting machines, cut overtime, and reduced hours at retail post office locations. Predictably, these changes created massive backlogs and rapidly diminished on-time delivery rates. DeJoy seems pretty giddy at the fact that the Postal Service is struggling under his leadership. Professor Richard Wolff explains why. Conservatives repeat that government services are poor, overpriced, etc., Once in power, gut government services or service quality. So public buys higher cost private services. US Post Office, latest example. UPS, FedEx, etc. Latest winners. The people lose. Now, it's particularly important for Richard Wolff to bring up this point in the context of a story involving Postmaster Louis DeJoy, because he is very much tied up with the private companies that the U.S. Post Office serves as a competitor to. Now, I do want to also talk a little bit about how the post office is run or has standards that are very different from other government agencies. In fact, in 2021, the post office has, in fact, been struggling. It's been a tough year for the post office. As Reuters reported, U.S. Postal Service reports 4.9 billion in 2021 net losses, right? So first off, if you're talking about a government agency, why are you treating it as if it's a business entity that needs to turn a profit? No other government agency is treated that way. And again, while the United States Postal Service is expected to run like a business, it's also worth mentioning that previous Republican administrations have implemented certain regulations that private businesses certainly do not have to deal with. For instance, USPS has reported net losses of nearly $100 billion since 2007. That stems in part from 2006 legislation that required that the agency pre-fund more than $120 billion in retiree healthcare and pension liabilities, a requirement that labor unions have called an unfair burden not shared by other businesses. So again, they have to deal with this insane regulation that forces them to prepay or pre-fund, I should say, hundreds of billions of dollars in healthcare and pension liabilities. And then, unlike any other government agency, the post office is supposed to be run like a business. It's incredible. So yes, while the Postal Service has been struggling thanks to the decisions made by previous Republican administrations, Louis DeJoy is also intentionally accelerating and exacerbating things. So far, his leadership has amounted to making more cuts, raising prices. In fact, there was a story that was published just 2 days ago indicating that he was raising prices even more. And of course, he seems to love firing workers. DeJoy in March announced a plan to cut $160 billion in predicted losses over the next decade. He says, we have years of inflicted damage to fix that. We have years of inflicted damage to fix that will necessitate us taking some continued uncomfortable actions. And look, it really shouldn't be surprising that the changes led by DeJoy would slowly dismantle the post office. I mean, all you really need to do is get to know who Louis DeJoy is, what his background is, and the businesses he has ties to. Watch.
He took over his father's small and failing truck business and turned it into a multi-million-dollar logistics company. As CEO and chairman of New Breed Logistics, DeJoy spent decades working with the U.S. Postal Service and companies like Verizon and Boeing. In 2014, he sold the company to XPO Logistics for $615 million, where he served as CEO for another year and change and on the board of directors until 2018. He and his wife have significant financial ties to companies that contract with or compete with the U.S. Postal Service, such as the shipping company UPS and the trucking company J.B. Hunt, according to filings with the Office of Government Ethics. And while federal records show DeJoy divested his stock in UPS before becoming Postmaster General, he still owns a large equity stake in his old employer XPO Logistics, also a Postal Service contractor.
Yes. I mean, conflicts of interest have run amok in Congress, in most government positions at this point. Certainly in the case of Louis DeJoy, we've talked at length about how members of Congress are invested in individual stocks, which is absolutely insane because they determine legislation that impacts the very companies that they're personally invested in. I mean, these issues show how the system is intentionally set up so the people who are supposed to be looking out for us are actually working against us. And in this case, you have Louis DeJoy, who has a long history of financial ties to companies that want to see the United States Postal Service absolutely destroyed. Now, these conflicts of interest are pretty relevant. In fact, in late October, documents detailed the dozens, not just a few, the dozens of conflicts of interest that Louis DeJoy has today. Let's watch.
Now, these internal documents were obtained under court order by the government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, also known as CREW. Now, here's one example. In August 2020, J.P. Chase said it held talks with the Postal Service several months before about installing ATMs in post offices. At the time of those talks, DeJoy's financial interests in J.P. Chase was more than $15,000. They also show that DeJoy had conflicts of interest relating to the company where he served as a chief executive, XPO Logistics, a company that later received a $120 million contract from the Postal Service. The U.S. Postal Service maintains DeJoy acted in compliance with ethics regulations, saying in a statement, quote, "When and how he divested reflects the process he was instructed to follow by the Postal Service Ethics Office in compliance with federal ethics regulations."
Now, some documents obtained by the New York Times shows that Louis DeJoy has, in fact, used his position as Postmaster General to engage in what appears to be self-dealing. The United States Postal Service has paid about $286 million over the past 7 years to XPO Logistics, the former employer of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. He still holds at least $30 million to, by the way, $75 million in stakes in the company, which has ramped up its business with the Postal Service since he took the helm at the agency. The Times also reports the documents also show a surge in revenue for XPO from the Postal Service since Mr. DeJoy took over. The Postal Service paid XPO Logistics and its subsidiaries about $14 million over just 10 weeks in 2020, compared with $3.4 million during the same time frame in 2019 and $4.7 million in 2018. Now, controversially, his companies still hold active service contracts with the United States Postal Service. I mean, the fact that that's even allowed is insane. Obviously, this creates a situation where self-dealing can happen. And if you're wondering how much longer Louis DeJoy intends on staying in the role of Postmaster General, well, he made clear in February of this year that he doesn't plan on going anywhere.
How much longer are you planning to stay?
A long time. Get used to me.
As long as the board approves your staying?
That's as far as my commitment to see our plan through, I'm here until I can see it tangibly produce the results we intended to.
So, look, what can the Biden administration, this Democratic administration, do about this? What can he do about Louis DeJoy? Well, unfortunately, all you need to do is look at his job performance so far, and you'll get the answer. He's not able to do much. And in this case, it's because of how the system is set up. In other cases, it doesn't seem like he fights pretty aggressively for his own agenda. But nonetheless, he can't unilaterally decide to remove DeJoy from his position as Postmaster General. The only person who can do that, or the only people who can do that, are the Board of Governors. The only thing that Biden can do is appoint the individuals who serve on that board. Now, DeJoy was selected by the USPS Board of Governors, all of whom, by the way, had been appointed by Donald Trump. While the president can fire other high-ranking executive officials at will, federal law bars the president from terminating the Postmaster General under any circumstances. Biden can attempt to oust DeJoy indirectly, but that option is fraught with legal uncertainties and certain to trigger Republican complaints of norm busting. The only people, as I mentioned, who can do anything about this happen to be the USPS Board of Governors. And this all, ironically, is due to the fact that there was congressional action back in 1970 that was meant to kind of insulate the post office from political influence in the executive branch. In 1970, to oversee USPS's activities, Congress established a 9-member board of governors who are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. No more than 5 members of the board may belong to the same political party. Once confirmed to the board, governors can only be removed by the president for cause. That means their jobs are safe unless the president can show that they engaged in malfeasance or extreme neglect of duty. Slate continues to write that the Board of Governors, in turn, selects the Postmaster General, who is not subject to Senate approval. And once appointed, the Postmaster General can only be removed by the board, though it need not justify its reason. Now, there's a little bit of good news, but don't hang on to the good feelings too long. Because Biden recently appointed nominees to the USPS Board of Governors, and they saw Senate confirmations just this past summer, strengthening the possibility that the board, which is now composed equally of Democrats and Republicans, will look at the audit's findings and return DeJoy to sender. That would be really nice, but there is unfortunately a problem. There was one Democrat appointed to the Board of Governors by Donald Trump. Wow, a Democrat. That's surprising. That's pretty shocking, right? Except this Democrat is actually pretty damn conservative. He is unlikely to go against Louis DeJoy. He has actually stood up for Louis DeJoy in the past. Now, the other thing that's pretty unfortunate is that we have a lot on the line, especially when it comes to a government agency that provides such a vital service to Americans.
When a letter is mailed, it joins over 600 million pieces of mail to and from destinations all over the nation and the world that are handled every day by the U.S. Postal Service. That is in excess of 40% of the entire world's mail volume. Your letter is then transferred by one of the Postal Service's 200,000 motor vehicles to its first stop, one of 40,000 United States post offices. It takes a workforce of 800,000 people to keep the mail moving, making the Postal Service the largest civilian employer in the U.S.
You guys, the post office is lit. I mean, it is such a wonderful agency that does so much important work. And it's incredibly important for the Biden administration to ensure that the Board of Governors takes a good hard look at what Louis DeJoy has been doing recently to dismantle this vital service. And look, it really doesn't take much to find someone better than Louis DeJoy for this role. In fact, even Joe Rogan would be a better replacement.
Do they do the post office well? No.
Yes.
What do they do well?
They do the post office pretty good, actually.
But guess what? If the post office closed tomorrow, it would be all right. You'd still get mail. Amazon would pick. No, it wouldn't. Amazon would pick that up.
Through UPS, it would cost a lot more.
It wouldn't, though. Competition would start kicking in, and between UPS and FedEx and Amazon and drones and blah 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 and DA.
I'm sorry. Could you imagine if I, as a socialist, was just like, and then like the profit motives are official, and then you'd like make it public, and then it just like kick in and like drones and blah blah blah. He literally just said, and Rogan was right, of course, but of course didn't even address like, oh, there'd be massive swaths of the country where there wouldn't be any delivery because it doesn't make any economic sense to provide that delivery, to the fact that the U.S. Postal Service is actually predates almost all major institutions in this country. It's actually written into federal law. It helped. It actually helped us during other banking crises, and actually does work well today. I guess besides like the ever-present threat of waiting in line for a couple of minutes.
So I think that list of all the incredible things that the post office does, but typically doesn't get credit for, was a good list shared by the late, great Michael Brooks. And he's not the only one who had love for the post office. So does super producer Cale Brooks, who's going to join me now and talk about it a little bit. So Cale, did I deliver? I know you like segments on this topic.
Oh, I think we can correctly say that we delivered.
Nice.
The USPS might be having trouble because of deregulation and defunding. I'm beating the joke, but we delivered. Yeah, I mean, it's it's pretty wild. I'm gonna be like, the thing that honestly came to my mind while I was watching your segment. This sounds like it's coming out of left field, but I promise you it's not. Because I was reading recently about post-colonial states that after colonialism ends and they're now trying to formulate their own countries, they're trying to have sovereignty, they're trying to like build up their industry, all that. In a lot of the world, especially in places like Africa, for instance, you have these situations where there really isn't a new group of people who are able to just take the reins of the country. And the elites in those countries basically just use the state as just like a rent-seeking institution where they're basically going in, taking what they can, using the state just for their very specific narrow interests, and to the detriment of not just like ordinary people. I mean, that happens in capitalism pretty regularly, but to the detriment of like economic growth broadly, that like it was this really regressive situation. And there's like structural reasons for why that is. And it's not worth going into, too much. But the point is that like what we're seeing in these, like someone like a DeJoy, they're in there, they're, wrecking havoc. They're doing whatever they want. It's like, the problem, like you're saying, is there's this massive lack of democratic accountability. There's this massive lack of real democratic costs for them doing this, that really these people can go in there and just like dismantle the state all they want. And Biden, I mean, I obviously agree, like he's not a Bernie Sanders, obviously. But in some ways, the fact that he's picking and choosing his fights on like infrastructure and on the social spending and failing at delivering what he's been fighting for, and then you have all of this other stuff that's just collapsing around him. He doesn't have the means to deal with these things, and it's because there really aren't means right now in American politics. There is no counterweight. That's like we said this earlier in the show, but that is fundamentally the problem, where we barely even have true democracy. And so these elites, some of them are like major corporations and capitalists, and some of them are just like these like kind of petty grifters, these vultures that swoop in and take what they can of a carcass, basically, finish the analogy. And what can we do? I mean, there really isn't something right now that's available for us to do something about this. And it makes you want to pull your hair out.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. And, I understand, and I definitely empathize. Like, I feel the rage that people feel when they watch a video of Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema just like brazenly dismiss their own constituents, or not give in to any of the just constant pressure on social media to vote in favor of the budget reconciliation bill. I understand that frustration, but I'm also hoping that people understand that you have, like, to me, I don't even like to think of lawmakers as good or bad, good or evil. That doesn't even matter, right? Take a step back and look at the incentives and disincentives. On one hand, you have atomized constituents who are full of rage, and I completely empathize with that, but they're not organized, they have no power, and they're atomized. Then you go to the incentives that these lawmakers have, and it's their personal investments in the stock market. It's the corporate donors who do not want them to pass any type of social spending plan that could increase their taxes, right? So this is all about incentives and disincentives. I think you also add a really good point about the lack of democracy, right? How democracy needs to be expanded. But in order to even get to that point where we can expand democracy, we need organized labor. Really, that's the only thing that I can see as a real step forward. And that, I think for a lot of people, it sounds discouraging because organizing takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. But there really are no easy answers to what we're going through right now. And I always say this, we have to look to solutions that have worked in the context of our own country in the past. And really the only time this country has secured any power, any rights, any economic policies that actually benefit ordinary people was when we had organized labor.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.